If you spend any amount of time looking at supplements and doing research on the internet, chances are you've come across something called creatine. It's one of the most studied supplements with over 1,000 different research studies that are targeting creatine and its functions in the body. You've probably heard it's used for muscle contractions and strength. A lot of bodybuilders will tote creatine as a great bodybuilding supplement. We may talk about creatine for brain function, even for sleep deprivation. But what about creatine for things like pregnancy and postpartum? We're going to get into all of that today. We're going to talk about what creatine actually is, how it's utilized in the body, what some of the most common applications of creatine are, and why it's beneficial for those things. We'll talk about some of the emerging research that shows creatine's use in other areas, and then we'll talk about whether or not creatine is right for you, and if so, how to safely utilize it. So let's break down what creatine actually is. From a foundational standpoint, creatine is 3 amino acids that are linked together. Now, not 3 total amino acids, just 3 different types of amino acids that are all linked together to create this one molecule. We find creatine mainly from things like red meat and fish, so you can get a lot of it from the diet. And in the body, it's found mostly in your muscles, but also in your heart, your kidneys, and your brain. About 95% of creatine, though, is found in muscles, which is why creatine is heavily associated with things like strength of contraction, weightlifting, bodybuilding, that type of stuff. Now, the main form of creatine that you're going to find in supplement form is going to be called creatine monohydrate. Almost all supplements are the same. They're almost always going to be creatine monohydrate. Now, when you take in and absorb creatine, it's going to get converted in the body and stored as phosphocreatine. Now, this is really important because this lends to what creatine actually does within the body. And almost like think of it like a battery. Batteries are the energy system. Creatine is going to work with the energy systems of our cells. It's going to work in the mitochondria, specifically with something called ATP. Now, you don't need to know what ATP is, but ATP is the energy molecule within our cells. It's what we produce in the electron transport chain when we convert things like sugar into energy. ATP then gets utilized in the body for energy and muscle contractions and things like that. So we have to constantly be regenerating ATP. So we're constantly going from something called ADP to ATP, which is adenosine diphosphate, adenosine triphosphate. The difference is that phosphate group. So what's going to happen in the cells when we take in this phosphocreatine is that we're going to be able to donate that phosphate group from the creatine molecule towards the ADP to combine it to create ATP. So when we're fully saturating the tissue with phosphocreatine from supplementation of creatine monophosphate, what's going to happen is we're going to end up creating a better energy utilization system. We're going to have plenty of that phosphocreatine sitting around so that we can push really hard. Now, the reason that this is important for strength of contraction, again, the more we're working out and exercising in those really short bursts, we're going to be using an energy system that requires heavily that creatine phosphate shuttle system. So we're going to be burning through a lot of that ATP utilizing short burst exercises. So this is really important for strength training. It's also really important for things like sprint training. So creatine's been kind of incorporated into a lot of other sports situations where we have a lot of this in cycling, we call it yo-yoing, right? Where you may be running a marathon, but then you may have to have this really fast finish at the end that's going to require a huge output of energy. Things like creatine can help really support those pathways. So creatine, we got to think about it from a muscle standpoint as helping with the strength of contraction and short duration exercise bouts. So strength training, sprinting, and then again, some of those more endurance sports like triathlon, cycling, running, where we've got to have these bursts of energy, or even sports like football or soccer, where we've got these big bursts followed by short bouts of rest. So creatine can be utilized almost in any athletic standpoint because almost any athletic sport is going to have these bursts within them that are going to really utilize that creatine kinase system. So really important for muscle and strength. Now, the reason that we utilize this from a strength standpoint also is that if we can increase the force of contraction or the endurance within that strength exercise, we're going to be able to lift harder for longer, which is going to then lend itself to better muscle gains over time. So creatine, super important for that muscle strength. Now, we also talk about how this can be utilized in aging because as we age, once we hit a certain age, we start to just, no matter what we do, we start to lose some of our muscle mass over time. So if we can improve strength of muscle contraction and improve lean body mass, we can kind of put off some of those age-related declines in muscle mass, and that also comes along with a lot of the cognitive decline and kind of decline physically over time. One of my favorite quotes is, muscle is metabolic currency as we age. So if we can really make sure that we're focusing focusing on maintaining muscle mass throughout the years, that's going to be super important. And if creatine can help with our exercise and help maintain lean muscle mass, almost anybody over 40, you could make the argument that they should be taking something like creatine. Now, so creatine's not just in muscles, creatine's also in the brain. So that's why we get a lot more of these cognitive effects that start to come from creatine. And so in the brain, we're going to have a lot of nerves that require ATP for function. So creatine, super good for brain function. This is why it's also been linked a lot to sleep. So a lot of times, we're not sleeping, we're stressed out, our brains aren't going to function right. We get that brain fog, the cloudiness, things like that. So a lot of new emerging research is showing, they've done studies on 24-hour sleep deprivation, and they've looked at reflexes and mood and cognitive kind of awareness, and creatine helps to support all of those systems. So creatine is one of the best things that you can do if you're sleep deprived. Now, this doesn't mean that you can just take creatine and it's going to override the fact that you're not sleeping. It doesn't mean you can just decide, I'm only going to sleep 4 hours a night and I'm going to take creatine instead. That's not what I'm saying. But if you are someone who struggles to get adequate amounts of sleep and you find yourself kind of dragging throughout the day, creatine can really step in to help make sure that your brain is still functioning as optimally as possible given the circumstances. So again, I'm not saying that you can just choose not to sleep and take creatine. That's not the case. But if you're someone who struggles to sleep, creatine may be very helpful here. Now, we've also got a lot of cognitive boosts from another mechanism or another pathway. So we've heard of the gut-brain axis. We've heard of the HPA axis, the hypothalamic-pituitary axis. We have all of these axis and signaling pathways within the body and within the endocrine system. So new research is actually starting to look at muscles as their own endocrine system and endocrine organ. And we have this muscle-brain axis. So most of us know intuitively, we go to the gym, we're going to get this hit of dopamine, we're going to feel better. Many people, you get stressed out, you're irritated, you're frustrated, you go to the gym, you feel way better afterwards. There's an actual neurological process that's happening there, and there's a signaling pathway that goes from your muscles to your brain. And so scientists have started to kind of identify what some of those signaling molecules are. They're called myokines. So these are signaling cytokines or signaling molecules produced by muscles that can actually go and have an effect on the brain. So a couple of the really important cytokines or myokines in this case are going to be IL-6, IL-10, irisin, and BDNF. It's not important for the sake of this video that we understand what all of those are, but things like IL-6, that's an inflammatory signaling molecule, so creatine can downregulate, thus reducing inflammation associated with exercise. It's also helping with mood stabilization because of that IL-6. Irisin, super good for energy conversion, helps with insulin and glucose responses, so that's super good, especially in people like diabetics who have that insulin sensitivity issue, who struggle with blood sugar regulation. Exercise, we know, is one of the best things you can possibly do for diabetes. That irisin production may be one of the things that's reduced or produced by muscles during exercise that's going to help support that insulin pathway. Irisin also helps to increase something called BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is actually a very important signaling molecule for nerve protection and for nerve growth. So this is going to stimulate neuronal protection and growth. A lot of times we get our best thinking and things like that done after exercise. I know that I'm the most cognitively clear and have the best thought processes when I'm actually exercising or going for a walk or something like that. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but BDNF is going to be something that plays a role in that. And so if we're consuming creatine around exercise, it's going to help reduce our IL-6, increase IL-10, increase irisin, and increase BDNF. That's having a very important regulatory factor for brain health. So not just brain energy production, but also actual neurogenic brain health. So super important there. Another reason that that's something that's really important in the aging process. And the last thing that's kind of emerging in the utilization of creatine is pregnancy and postpartum uses. So there's not a lot of human studies that are done on this. So I just want to clarify that off the bat, that this is emerging research, but it's very promising and it's showing almost very little downside or almost no downside, right? So they've done a bunch of animal studies that have looked at creatine on a developing fetus. And they've actually shown that creatine can help offset any sort of damage from hypoxia that may occur during delivery of a fetus or of a baby. In this case, it was a mouse model. So again, not a human study, but in mouse models, they've shown that it's very fetoprotective, and that has to do with fetal oxygen utilization. So pretty cool there. And then again, from a muscle recovery standpoint, it may actually help during delivery and labor, there's a lot of, muscle contractions that are happening in the pelvic area as we're trying to push that baby out. So if we can help to increase the energy production and energy turnover during those contractions, it's going to help the mom kind of make it through labor a little bit easier and offset some of that fatigue that comes towards the end of labor. So really cool there. And then the other thing is when we think about kind of from a cognitive standpoint, a lot of moms struggle with sleep, obviously. After delivering a baby, we get this postpartum baby brain that happens. There's a lot of mood instabilities that can come along with that. And creatine, for all the reasons we already talked about, can really help to stabilize energy production within the brain. So again, not a whole lot of human trials done, but a lot of really promising early research done in mouse models and also in some of our kind of theoretical models. If we know it works here and then this is how it's working here, we can also then kind of extrapolate that over to here. So that'd be a great place for future research to kind of dig into. So kind of mentioned not a lot of downsides with some of those animal models, specifically with pregnancy, but there's really not a lot of downsides to taking creatine just in general. So there's a couple myths out there. And the first one would be that creatine damages your kidneys. And they've actually done dozens of long-term studies on people that are healthy. It does not cause kidney issues. Now, the caveat there is if you are healthy or if you have healthy kidneys, you don't have to worry about creatine affecting your kidneys. If there's kidney damage, this is a place where you want to have a conversation with your doctor before you jump into any sort of creatine protocol. So I will state that in healthy individuals with healthy kidneys, creatine is not something that we have to worry about. The other thing would be a lot of times people are associating this with hair loss because there was one study that showed that creatine levels increase DHT, which is known for producing hair loss in a lot of people. So we want to make sure we're not increasing DHT for obvious reasons. That can cause a lot of other issues that we can kind of address through hormonal pathways and things like that. But follow-up studies to that one increasing DHT study did not show any actual hair loss as a result of creatine. So we don't have to worry about it from that. And then the last one is that it makes you bloated because creatine does cause water retention. However, it's intramuscular water retention. It's not going to be bloating and it's not going to make you look puffy. So you don't necessarily have to worry about creatine making you look bloated or puffy. It may make you look bigger, but it's going to be intramuscular water, not bloating or anything like that. So talked about how creatine works. Let's talk about kind of how to take creatine if you decide it's for you. And again, the people who shouldn't take creatine are going to be people with actual kidney issues. And it's not that you can't take it, it's just that you need to work with your provider or your doctor who's looking at your labs to make sure that we're not creating kidney damage. And then anybody who's concerned about any sort of water retention, again, there's very little risk to this, but if you are someone who's concerned about water retention, definitely have a conversation with your healthcare provider about that before you get on any sort of creatine regimen. So we talk about how to take creatine. Again, creatine comes as creatine monohydrate almost all the time. So traditionally, and I've been taking creatine for years. I started taking it probably when I was in high school lifting weights. And it was always, we've got to go on this loading phase, 20 grams for 5 to 7 days, really build that saturation up in the tissue. We go back down to a maintenance dose. We do that for a couple months, and then we come off of it and we kind of cycle it. And so the updated research is not really showing that we have to cycle it, and it's really not even showing that we have to do that loading dose if we don't want to. But if you do want to get that saturated point in the muscles faster, you can always do that 20-gram loading dose. I would typically take that as 10 grams twice a day. When we talk about the maintenance dose, this is typically going to be 5 to 10 grams every single day because, again, we want to maintain that muscle saturation. What I personally do is I take 5 grams every day. I take an extra 5 grams on days I'm exercising. So if I know I'm going to go to the gym or I'm going to have a hard run or something like that, I know I'm going to be utilizing more ATP. I'm burning through more of that phosphocreatine that's stored up there. So I just want to take a little bit extra to make sure I'm offsetting any of that. So I take 10 grams again on days that I am exercising and 5 grams on days I'm not exercising. That's not scientifically backed. That's just my personal, anecdotal bro science that I do personally. I personally mix it with amino acids, take it before I work out. You can mix it with water. You can mix it with anything. Adding a little bit of carbs or protein may help with some of the absorption. But again, we're talking about slight variations here. Pretty safe. works in almost every system of the body. Very cool. Lots of upside, not a whole lot of downside. So if you're someone who's looking for muscle strength and bodybuilding purposes, things like that, of course, take creatine. We've known this. If you're someone who's over 40 and looking to offset any of the net detrimental effects, whether cognitive or physical, from aging, creatine is awesome for you. If you're someone who's pregnant and looking to carry a healthy pregnancy, have better delivery, and have better recovery after pregnancy, something that we may want to consider. Again, the research isn't all there, but it's very promising so far with very little risk associated with it. So that may be something that you want to have a conversation with your healthcare provider about as well. Or if you're someone who struggles with sleep or is under a lot of stress and you get that cognitive decline, lack of mental clarity, things like that because of stress or lack of sleep, creatine is going to be something that's awesome for you as well. The other thing is that creatine typically comes from red meat and fish. If you're vegetarian or vegan and you're just simply not getting a lot of this in your diet, creatine is going to be great to help support that as well and offset what you're not getting from your diet. So final thoughts here. Creatine is an absolutely amazing supplement. It helps with the energy systems within the body. Almost anybody could benefit from it. Now, the key, what I will tell you, is a lot of people want a supplement that's going to work in the background. From everything that we've talked about mechanistically, creatine is not something that I personally think is going to work in the background because a lot of it requires muscle activation. So creatine is not going to build muscle on its own. It's going to support strength of contraction and endurance of contractions, which means if you want to offset the muscle loss with aging, you can't just take creatine and hope it's going to offset that. Creatine is going to make your lifting or your strength training that you're doing more effective. A lot of the brain regeneration or brain neuroprotective things are coming because of the muscle-brain signaling pathways, which means that you've got to contract the muscle to get the benefit from it. So don't just look at creatine as something that you can take and it's going to fix all your problems. Creatine will amplify what you're already doing through a healthy exercise routine and a healthy strength training routine. So keep that in mind. And again, there's a lot of evolving research coming out on the muscles as an endocrine organ in the muscle-brain axis. So if you want to get on the front end of that, I think creatine's a really great way to maximize all the benefits of your strength training and exercise routine and really help to support brain health through muscle activation and contraction. So I hope this video helped. If it helped, subscribe, give me a like, comment in the description below kind of how you use creatine if you have any other health related questions you would like to hear answers to. My goal is to help educate as many people as possible so that you can make informed decisions for your health. So hope this helps. Take care.